and welcome everyone to this evening's program. Tonight, we will delve into the Old Testament story of Sarah and Abraham with the guidance of our speaker, Tzivia Gover. Following the presentation, you are invited to stay online for 20 minutes or so of informal community conversation. I have a few announcements before we get started. Next month, on March 7th, author and Jungian analyst Erica Lorentz will present The Body as Shadow, Remembering the Body. She will share material from her new book about the importance of bringing the body out of the shadow where negative patriarchy has buried it. Allowing for the full ecology of the embodied soul is vital to our psychological and spiritual healing and growth. Recently, we put the word out for new board members and volunteers, and you responded. Stephanie Jacquier, Jen Maynard, and Carol McGrone, thank you for pitching in behind the scenes. We are currently interviewing a potential new board member and still seeking one more. The board meets once a season for business, followed by potluck and good conversation. Please contact me directly if interested. I'd love to talk with you about it. My email is in the chat below and on our website, westmassjung.org. Finally, we just launched our first in-person program since the pandemic, which is a monthly film and discussion group. 30 people gathered to watch a Marion Woodman film that sparked wonderful sharing. If you are local, please join us at Smith College for the next meeting on Sunday, February 23rd. You'll find the full schedule and location on our website. I think that's all I have, so I'll hand it off to Penelope Tarasuk, who will introduce Tzivia.
Good evening. I am introducing Tzivia Gover, who I met briefly before the pandemic over tea. And then the second time we met was just the other day over tea. So I am delighted to introduce someone who's very local to our area now. I'm sure you've been other places, but I'm going to ask you, Tzivia, to put your website contact information in the chat because it is just jam-packed with all kinds of wonderful things that I'm not going to be able to say all of them. But I will say a few things. I mean, I do believe you have been in touch with the writer in yourself and the dreamer in yourself and the spirit soul in yourself from a very young age. And that at 23, you recognized yourself as a writer and a woman who wants to share her dreams, a dreamer and a writer without words. And we were talking a little earlier, and you mentioned that you do lead a writing group, an open writing group on Wednesday mornings at the Forbes Library. And if you reach out to her website, she'll send you a link, but it's not only is it about writing, but it's inviting to write about your dreams, which is really a wonderful, wonderful practice. I'd like to say that you went to Hampshire College, which is fabulous to hear. You went to Columbia for your master's in creative nonfiction, and you have had a number of certifications in dreamwork and writing. You've been an adjunct professor of English and writing. You've been a journalist for the Boston Globe and the Hampshire Gazette. You know, you're really quite a woman, leading workshops in many places in the world and across the country in dreaming. And one of the things that came across to me when I read some of your material was the joy that this brings you and what you bring to this work. And I am delighted that you're going to teach us about Sarah tonight from the Bible. So thank you and welcome.
Well, thank you so much. What a beautiful, beautiful introduction, and what a beautiful group of people. It's wonderful to see all of you here, um, and to see some people I know from the dream world, from the Jungian world, and from my synagogue. So really, really special. So I am going to share with you my joy in rediscovering Sarah, and I'll take you on this journey with me through poetry and translation of the original Hebrew text from the Hebrew Bible, or as some call it, the Old Testament. And I'm going to share my screen with you as we do. There will be opportunities for you to participate. I want this to be a journey that you come on with me, so that it's not just me talking to you. So we'll share in the chat some feedback, we'll have a Q&A, and there'll also be a couple of opportunities to interact with one another to sort of process what you're hearing and what you're learning, and to find where it resonates in you. You know, in dreamwork, when we listen to one another's dreams, we take it in as our own dream. So maybe take in this dream of Sarah as your dream too. And I just hope that you all feel very welcome to contribute and to share thoughts and opinions, no matter what faith background or none that you come from, you know, whatever your faith background is, or if you don't particularly have one. This is a story that's foundational to three religions, and also has become very woven into our various cultures in various ways. So we'll talk all about that. So I'm going to launch in with Redreaming Sarah, and restoring this patriarchal narrative to its indigenous and feminine roots. So in order to do that, you're going to have to get to know a few characters. So Sarah, who is a mythological legend. We don't know if she ever really lived, but she lives in our imaginations. And she lived approximately in these years, again, because she's mythical. There are, and legendary, there are discussions about when exactly she lived, but that's a good enough guess for now, or estimation. And she was born in Ur, which is southern Iraq now. And she then traveled to Haran, which is in Turkey. And then, of course, Canaan, which is in what is now Israel. And the other character you'll get to know is me, Tzivia. And I was born in 1963. Not ashamed to say it. And I am a woman of the United States, New York, and Massachusetts. And the third character that you'll get to know is the Torah, the Hebrew text, where this story was ultimately recorded. It was an oral story, an oral history for generations and generations, hundreds, maybe thousands of years, before it was written down in a form that has now been preserved for thousands more years. So one thing that you will want to know about me is that I'm not a theologian. I'm not a rabbi. I'm not, I don't have any degrees in ancient Near East studies. You heard that I do have various degrees and certifications, but I don't have that. I'm a poet and a dream worker. And that's what I come to these texts from and with, and as a poet and a dream worker. I'm a 6th grade dropout from Hebrew school. But I've embarked on a disciplined study of this story for many years. So I've been reading, I've been attending lectures, and in fact, at the age of 61, I began to study biblical Hebrew so that I could translate the story for myself from the original texts. Ironically, I came to Sarah's story from Abraham's. So I'll stop the share for a moment just to explain how that encounter happened. This was at a time in my life when I had suffered a devastating loss as a mother. I had been in a same-sex custody battle with my ex. My daughter was about 4.5 at the time, and I lost in court as the non-biological parent and was unable to see my daughter or have any contact for 5 years. Somewhere towards the end of this ordeal, despite the fact that, as I mentioned, I had no strong background in Jewish texts at all. I was aware of the story of Abraham and Sarah because it's told once a year in synagogue on the one day or the few days when when more Jews than usual go to synagogue, the high holy days. So I was familiar with this story, but it never meant much to me, except it seemed very cruel because in this story, Sarah, who's 90 when she gives birth, after all that, she almost loses her son when Abraham is told to sacrifice him. So somehow this story woke me up literally at night, as if in a dream. And it filled my heart. And for some reason, and I've been trying to explain it ever since, this was decades ago, it opened up a well of faith and understanding in me and surrender that was deeply healing. And it seemed so inexplicable to me and so precious. And I wanted to understand. So it was through this story of Abraham and Isaac that I got connected. And I started to write poetry because how else to understand something that's inexplicable? So that's what started me on this journey. At the time, I had a full-time job. Miraculously, a couple of weeks or maybe 3 after this event, this transformative event, my daughter was returned to me. And so I had my hands full, but still, in my spare time, I always wrote poetry and I investigated. And it wasn't until many years later that I really started to dig into Sarah's story in the past several years. And that led me to all the rest of it, to study biblical Hebrew. I actually am also studying Torah cantillation, the chanting, because I've come to understand that the story isn't meant to be read. It was an oral story first. And when it was put into writing, like all the stories in the Torah, it was put in, and I'll show you this later, not only with consonants and vowels, but with marks for how it's to be chanted, how it's to be sung. This is meant to be voiced through the body, okay? And as a poet, I wanted to know what that melody and that rhythm of the story was in addition to the words. So that's how I came in. I came in through a dreamlike experience. I came in through poetry. And because the prima materia of poetry is words and letters, I started to dig into the words through my study of biblical Hebrew. And that was like that dream of a house, when you have that dream of your house and all of a sudden in the dream there are extra rooms. Has anybody had that dream? Pretty common dream, right? All of a sudden there are rooms you didn't know about in a house you're familiar with. Well, like that dream of hidden rooms, as I opened up each word, I found new worlds. It's been very exciting, and I'm going to show you some of that today through the poetry and so on, and the translation. So I like to start by getting centered, by coming into ourselves individually and also as a group. So I want to welcome you all. Sarah and Abraham's tent was known as a place of welcome. They were known for their hospitality. It's one of the many themes from this story that we can take forward with us. to connect with the spirit of welcoming. And as we gather together, I want you to welcome yourself to the story, to the space, and to this experience. And there's a lovely song and prayer that I just wanted to share with you. I am tone deaf, so I'm not going to sing this to you, but if anybody knows the melody and wants to belt it out, that's fine. But the words, and this is from Psalm 133, Hine ma tovu manayim, shevet achim gam yachad, or shevet achot gam yachad, to make it feminine. Behold how good and pleasant it is for us people to dwell together. So take a moment to center into yourself. If you want, you might close your eyes or just breathe consciously. And allow yourself to enter into a space of goodness. Let yourself feel as if you are entering Sarah's tent. Her tent was in a grove of sacred trees. Dream yourself into that space, sacred space among sacred trees. And perhaps even set an intention for yourself during this time together, to connect, perhaps, to be present, to be curious, nourished. And welcomed. Okay, so we can come back together, look around, notice all the people who you're sharing this space, who you've entered this tent with. Hopefully you'll get to know each other a bit. But let's start now by getting to know Sarah. I wrote this 4-line poem. It's called a Clerihew, and a Clerihew is a 4-line biographical poem, usually a little bit humorous. So I like to acknowledge that most of us don't know that much about Sarah. So don't feel bad if that's you. Okay, so what you missed that day in Sunday school, here's what most of us know about Sarah in the nutshell. I'll make you a mother, God told Sarah. She laughed and said, yeah, I doubt it. And for a long time, it seemed she had one, but then at 90, a son. So for most of us, that's what we know about Sarah, that she was barren, and then at age 90, she had a son, and maybe you know a few other details other than that. So let's do a little crowdsourcing of what we do know. And in the chat, put anything you know about Sarah, anything you know or have heard about Sarah or Hagar or both. So we'll crowdsource our knowledge. And even if all you know is how to spell her name, that's actually significant. So you can claim that. So go ahead and throw something in the chat. What you know, one thing you know about Sarah. Oh, come on, you must know something. If you can't use the chat, maybe go ahead and unmute. Okay, here we go. Oh, you're a knowledgeable bunch. Hagar had a son with Abraham as his concubine, and that boy was Ishmael. I believe she and Isaac were siblings. Abraham. I think Cole meant Abraham. And yes, that is something. Yep. The story does get pretty crazy, but not that crazy in terms of her being siblings with her son. But she was said to be either siblings or half siblings with her husband, Abraham. And that wouldn't have been unusual in that time. if your common parent was the father, that wouldn't have been considered incest. It's just if you were womb siblings, if you came from the same womb, that was something to be avoided. Sarah had the meaning of princess, very good, or a woman of high rank, the mother of multitudes, yes. She had a baby at an old age. That's what most of us know. The women were close at that time. They menstruated together. I have heard that. When she thought she was barren, yes, she offered her maidservant Hagar to her husband, Abraham. And again, that was, to us, that sounds crazy, but that's what was done back then in that time and place. She died when Isaac was young. Yeah, after we hear of the binding of Isaac, the next thing we know of Sarah is that she died, and she's Abraham's wife. Great. So you all know a lot. I'm going to, by the end of tonight, I hope you're going to know a lot more and have even the things that you do know have a different nuance, a different association, a different depth of understanding about it. Sarah was known, a few things that didn't come up in the chat that people often do know is that she was known for her beauty. Twice in her story, she's given to a king as a concubine or as a member of the harem or as a wife. We don't know exactly what was going on there, but the premise is she's so beautiful that people might kill Abraham for her sake, so that she needs to be posing as his sister and given to the king or Pharaoh. Another thing that people often think about with Sarah is her laughter. When God tells her that she's going to have a son, she laughs. And also that her name gets changed within her story. So I'm going to give you a bit of a whirlwind tour of Sarah's life. But first, I want to tell you why her story is so important. Why it's important that we get to know her story better. And that's because the story of Abraham, Sarah, and Hagar lies at the heart of three world religions. This story has influenced laws. It's influenced our attitudes about reproduction and reproductive rights, literature, and biases about women, who we are, and what our roles are and can be. For example, Sarah and Hagar's relationship, which we'll look at in more detail, is initially painted as, two women and Sarah's jealous of Hagar. Sarah's a cruel mistress because she sends Hagar and her son away. It's also a story that predates monotheism, and it's also seen as a story of the beginning of monotheism. And it has been used to suppress feminine ways of knowing. I experience this story as being at a crossroads between a time when the divine feminine and the divine masculine were more neatly knitted together, more balanced. And from here, things seem to have gone in the direction of uplifting the patriarchal, the masculine, and burying, extirpating women's ways of knowing. It is often also read as an origin story about the divisions between Jews and Muslims. Sarah and Hagar's problems, we could say, when Sarah casts Hagar out, that's seen often as this moment where these two peoples went in separate paths in a hostile, divisive way. This story also is foundational in stories that will flow from it, that affect our attitudes about land in general. And because of the covenant between God, Sarah, and Abraham about fertility and land, It affects attitudes about land in general, the land in the Middle East, and even the environment because of the ways women and the land get treated from here. But we are dreamers. And because we're dreamers, we know that we're storytellers because stories unfold, narratives unfold in our dreams every night, whether we try or not. With no effort on our part, our dreams spin out stories every night. Vivid, emotional stories. So we are dreamers. We are storytellers. And by reinvestigating this story, can we dream a better dream? Can we tell a better story? I believe the answer to that is yes. I want to share also that Sarah's story ends in the Bible, the Hebrew Bible. Sarah's story ends with her death in chapter 23 of Genesis. And the legend is that when she died, the light went out of her tent. When she died, the light went out of her tent. Isaac, who was grown by now, was very depressed, and sort of a darkness descended. And that darkness wasn't lifted until Isaac found a bride. A bride was found for him. She came from Sarah and the land of Sarah and Abraham's people. A servant was sent to that land very specifically to find a bride for Isaac. So returning to the lineage, the land of Sarah and Abraham, Rebecca is brought as Isaac's bride, and the light returns to the tent when Rebecca is instituted into it, when this becomes Rebecca's tent. So the lineage, the spiritual lineage of Sarah, the spiritual light of Sarah is passed on. So I believe that this can be a hopeful part of the tale for us about returning the spark of divinity, of the divine feminine, and of what's been lost from Sarah's story, to restore that spark back into the stories that we are telling. So to dig back into these stories, to find these earth-based and divine feminine roots so that there can be that balance again with the divine masculine and the divine feminine. So I'm going to share with you a little bit of more about where Sarah's story takes her and thus takes us, just to give you more of a basis for what's contained here. So as we try to reignite this spark. So the Cliff Notes version of Sarah's life. We meet Sarah when she enters the lineage. So basically what we're doing here in these next few minutes is looking at the story that's usually thought of as Abraham's story, but when we center Sarah in it, it becomes a different story. And we can see how actually powerful she is in the story and how much the story really does center on her. So Sarah enters the lineage in Genesis 11:29-32. And when we first meet Sarah, all we're told is that her name is Sarai. Her name does change in the story. Her name is Sarai, and she's Abraham, or Abram at the time's wife, and she's barren. So we're going to investigate that further, the barren part. So they travel from their original home in Ur through Haran, where they stay for quite a while, en route to Canaan. Pretty soon after they get to Canaan, there's a famine, and Sarah and Abraham go to Egypt. As I mentioned, there she is given to Pharaoh. We'll talk more about that as well. Next, we meet Sarah. She's arranging to have an heir since she's already well past menopause. She gives her younger maidservant, Hagar, to her husband to produce an heir. Her lineage is discussed. She's given a new name and a new calling, a calling to be the matriarch, the mother of nations. Her pregnancy is announced by mystical beings and God in a really very dreamy scene. Again, she returns to another king, another leader, this time King Abimelech, and again is given over as a member of the harem, as a wife. Again, with this ruse that she's Abraham's sister and not his wife, and we'll talk about that, what that might tell us, that this happens twice. Finally, Sarah conceives and bears a son. His name is Isaac, Yitzhak, which means laughter. And remember, we talked about Sarah. One of the things she's known for is her laugh. So her son is, in a sense, named for her. Her son grows up. Well, she nurses her son. She weans him. He grows up. And she exiles Hagar and Ishmael. And we'll talk about what that's all about. It's painted sort of as Sarah being jealous, Sarah being impetuous, making a cruel decision for no good reason. But we'll see that there's much more to that story too when we dig into the texts. Her son is almost sacrificed, the son that she waited until age 90 to have, at great danger to herself. And the odds of him surviving were so low, and yet he's sacrificed. And then her story ends with a chapter that's titled Chaye Sarah, meaning the life of Sarah. But in fact, this is the story of her death. Throughout the story, throughout all these chapters of her story, you'll notice that Abraham is often in Beersheba, and Sarah is often in the sacred grove of Mamre. So interestingly, in this chapter about her death, which is titled The Life of Sarah, she's buried. Abraham goes to trouble to bury her in a cave, to purchase this property that includes a cave and the trees that she loved. And this cave faces those sacred trees. So very interesting. When you look at the story this way, you can really see how this is a story about a powerful woman who has her own separate relationship and covenant with God, who has her own calling and her own spiritual power. So I want us to take some time, now that I've sort of put seeds into your imagination, of expanding, of growing who this woman was, who this legend was. And we'll consider her once again. So now we have a lot more than just she's barren, she's old, right? She's becoming a woman with a lot more agency in our imagination. So whereas you might have come in just thinking of her as this old, withered mother, maybe now you know that she's a woman who's known for her laughter. And she's also known for her love of pleasure. She actually says to God, what? You're telling me I am going to have a baby at this age, meaning that I, and Sarah says, going to have pleasure, sexual pleasure with my husband at this age. So she's a woman who knows pleasure. She's painted as this dangerous beauty, that she has so much beauty that, Abraham could get killed if she doesn't tell these lies to protect him. In other words, that she's his sister instead of his wife. But beauty in the time and place that we're talking about, the words for beauty would have applied to somebody with great spiritual purity. So is this beauty just outer beauty, just like the beauty of a fashion model? Or is this the beauty of somebody who keeps an inner light? And in terms of her being promised to these two different kings, this is one piece of evidence, along with others, that she might have been a priestess of the sacred marriage. She goes to Egypt the first time when there's a problem with famine, so the lands aren't fertile, And so a priestess of the sacred marriage might have been sent in a case like that. And in both cases, she is paid afterwards. Well, the couple is paid afterwards with livestock, human servants, and silver, which is how a priestess of the sacred marriage might have been remunerated. She's painted as a harsh mistress to Hagar, but we're going to look into her story and see a deeper possibility of her being a co-mother, a prophet who is trying to honor her ancestors and mother future generations by protecting her legacy. And we'll look more at that as I translate some of those verses. So we're opening up this world of other Sarahs, other possibilities of who she might be. So now I want to start to introduce you to some of the poems that resulted from me digging into these possible Sarahs, digging into the words themselves of the story, which is where I ground my theories, my information, my version of Sarah. I ground them into the actual words in the text. And any of the research I've done and the theories I've read about Sarah, which have been many, I only hold on to the ones that I can ground back into the text, that I can anchor in the text itself. So I want to share the first poem with you. And I'd like to show it to you and read it to you. So I'm going to see if that will work. So one thing you want to know before I read this poem, I told you about Sarah spending most of her time in the Grove of Mamre. And she would have lived in a reed hut or a reed tent. And these reed tents, which you can kind of see in the foreground of this relief, would have been woven with reeds. She's originally from Ur in Mesopotamia, where there were a lot of reeds. So this would have been a tradition she'd be familiar with. And these could be anything from meeting places to sacred huts of worship. And we'll see later that her name in Akkadian would have meant Queen of the Reed Hut. So it's likely that these were where she dwelled. So you might keep that. Oh, and the description of the sukkah, the sukkot, the huts that Jews dwell in at the harvest holiday, which are woven with greens and are supposed to have greens sticking up at the top. You can kind of see from these images that there might have been greens sticking up above the dome of the hut. Those are called sukkah or sukkot. And the word for these reed huts in Akkadian was Sukkot. I mean, it would be pronounced almost the same as Sukkot. So there's this connection between these sacred huts where goddesses and priestesses would dwell, and the carryover into Deuteronomy in this case, where the sukkah is described, and we'll see more connections with Sarah. So if this will open up easily, I'll show you the poem as I read it. And if not, because my computer goes very slowly when I'm on Zoom, I'll just simply read it to you. So I am going to, oh, I have hope that it's opening up. We'll give it another 3 seconds, and if it doesn't work, I'll just read. But I think it's very nice to be able to see it as you hear it. So the poem starts with a quote from Robin Wall Kimmerer: "Language is the dwelling place of ideas that do not exist anywhere else." So in this poem, I play with and I dig into, this is an example of how I dig into the words to find new meaning. And in this case, I'm digging into the word dwell. Dwell. to stay, to live or continue in a certain state, to dwell in ignorance, or to dwell in joy, as Eve did. In Eden, home, hut, dwell, as in birds nesting. Reside in English means to be motionless. In Hebrew, shakan, dwelling place, often referred to a royal residence. The rabbis gave it a feminine ending, Shekhinah, divine mother. You could say she dwells among us. Consider Inanna dwelling in a tent of woven reeds. Sarah wove her tent in a grove of sacred oak. Not to dwell on an unpleasant tale, but consider Josiah, kings. He demolished the dwelling places, the weavings the holy women made for her, cast her out. Dwellin, from the Old English, to lead astray. In Hebrew, a verb, to live like a nomad, as in, on the banks of which story will you pitch your tent? Dwell in a time before exile, before destruction, when reeds danced in the marshes as the women danced in the fields. It says, dwell in the Hebrew text is rendered by the phrase, let the Shekhinah rest. Unless we've been led astray, in which case let her sway. The moon dwells in the night, crescent of an eyelid long closed, now lifting. So that's an example of how I take a word, I look into its etymology, and I find more of the story. So what I want to invite you to do right now, I've just introduced a lot of possible Sarahs, a lot of information. We've dwelled in our heads for quite some time. So let's just take a moment now to get centered back into yourself. And if you want to close your eyes, go ahead and do that. But in any case, let some version of Sarah arise in you. The Kabbalah, the mystical form of Judaism, teaches that all of the characters in the Torah live within ourselves. Jung teaches the same, right? All the parts of the dream are parts of ourself, all the characters in the dream. So take Sarah in, male or female, whatever you are, anything in between. Find some version of Sarah in you. So it might help to close your eyes. Notice what images or words from what you've been hearing so far are staying with you. Notice what you feel in your body when you think about her story now. You think about her in the reed hut, the reed tent, in the sacred grove. You think about her maybe as a priestess of the sacred marriage, as a woman who received a promise to have a baby, and then long past childbearing years, the promise did not come true until even later. A woman who embodies beauty or laughter. A woman who made difficult choices. Different kind of mother. In what ways is she similar to you? How is she different? Is there something Sarah knows or has that you need in your life? Let those questions wash over you and just notice what comes up. How are you similar to Sarah? Different? What does she know or have that you could use in your life? And is there a theme in her story that you relate to in terms of mothering, in terms of promise? I'm going to put some of these questions into the chat. And just take another breath or two. And in a moment, if you want to take a few notes in your journal or in the chat about what comes up for you when you think of this, take a moment to do that. And we're going to go into breakout rooms for about 10 minutes so that you can process and think about some of this with one another. And I'm going to suggest when you get into your breakout room that you take turns. Person with the longest hair go first, just so you don't have to spend your time in your breakout room wondering who goes first. So person with the longest or the highest hair, whichever direction your hair goes first. And just share with each other something, maybe one of your responses to one of these discussion thinking prompts. How is Sarah most similar or different to me? What about her story? Which of her themes resonate with me? And does she have something or know something that I need? We're only partway into our journey investigating her, but in this moment, what's sticking? What's resonating? So while Andrew gets ready to put us in breakout rooms, if anyone wants to share anything in the chat, go ahead. Otherwise, you'll share with your participants in just a few minutes. And you'll have about 10 minutes and you'll get a warning when it's almost time to come back. So I'm going to just share quickly in the chat while I'm thinking of it. I had shared some of these links earlier before everybody was here. But now it will be easier for some of you to see it. These are just some links if you want to stay in touch, but I added the name of the International Association for the Study of Dreams, which all you Jungians would really love. The International Association for the Study of Dreams is an organization that I'm part of, and a couple of our participants here are very instrumental in, and it's an interdisciplinary group of scientists, psychologists, psychiatrists, artists, mystics, just people who are curious about their dreams, everything. We come together for a yearly conference, and during the year we share resources and offer different programs. So you'll definitely want to check out the International Association for the Study of Dreams. It's an amazing group. So I hope that everybody was able to find some connection to Sarah, even if it was a connection of resistance. So I spoke to one participant who the story makes them, or has traditionally made them angry already. They're seeing new possibilities, because of the sacrifice of Isaac and, other aspects of the story, Sarah being passed off as Abraham's sister so that Abraham could save his own skin. But I hope as we continue to go along, you'll keep on opening to new possibilities for this story. In this short amount of time, there's no way that I can open up every new room, every door, every word, but you'll get enough information so that you can start to dream your own dream of Sarah and Hagar that's rooted in the story, that's accurate, but alternative. So I'm going to just read another poem to you, again, going with this idea that everybody and everything in this dream of Sarah is a part of oneself. And this poem is called Dramatis Personae, and in it I become each part of the story. So before I share that with you, I just want to fill your mind with some imagery from the story and some of the images that have really taken hold of me. So right now you have a blank screen, which is very appropriate because the dream has to pop in from some some field of possibility. So here's our field of possibilities. So as a poet, I start with things. Devarim in Hebrew, the word devarim means both words and things. And I'm talking biblical Hebrew right now, not modern Hebrew. The word devarim refers to both words and things, which I think is perfect for us as dreamers, because dreams speak in the language of image. Dreams are pretty agnostic about words. You don't see a lot of words in your dreams. You see images. And images, not pictures, images in dreams and in our imagination are alive. They're not necessarily alive the way you or I are alive, but they are living, moving, vibrant clusters of emotion, of association, and they live and they move within us. So one of the first images that struck me in Sarah's story were the moon and the stars, or where Sarah and Abraham originated from in southern Iraq, was one of the places where the moon god, Sin, was worshipped. And when you think about their story, they went from Ur to Haran, and it's counterintuitive. They were on their way to Canaan, and if you look at a map, it doesn't really make sense that they would go from Ur to Haran. So what were they doing? Most likely they were going from the Temple of the Moon in Ur, a community of people who worship the moon, to a community of people who worship the moon in Haran, because that was another huge site of the moon worship. Okay, so the moon took hold of me. Most likely, I believe that Sarah was probably a priestess in the Temple of the Moon, and that's one reason that they went from one center of moon worship to another on their way to Canaan. Also, Abraham was known as the first astronomer. He studied the constellations and the stars, and he was an astrologer and an astronomer. So the moon and the stars come up again and again in my poems about Sarah. Also, we mentioned already the trees. The terebinth tree is mentioned in Sarah's story. The word for tree, for the terebinth, is Elon, E-L-O-N, very similar to the word for goddess. And there's a lot of connection between goddesses and trees. We talked about Sarah's grove, so trees come up again and again, sacred trees in my poetry about Sarah. The tent, we talked a little bit about the reed tent. These images, by the way, were made with Midjourney, an AI program. So Midjourney seems to think that priestesses would all be quite slender with flowing long hair. But they, at least these images can spark your imagination of what the hut and the gathering of women might have been like. And the ram, livestock comes up a lot in the story. The ram is instrumental in the scene when Isaac is being sacrificed. What saves him at the end is the message from an angel for Abraham to stop, and a ram caught in the thicket becomes the sacrifice instead of Isaac, which is pretty horrible too, of course. But one of the stories, one of the midrash, the imagined backstory of the story is that that ram was actually Sarah, mystically appearing to stop the sacrifice of her son. And of course, she is, in a sense, sacrificed because she ends up dying immediately after this episode is over. So the ram comes up a lot in my poetry as well. So I'm going to read for you another one of the poems. This one I'll just read instead of show to you because it's very straightforward. Dramatis Personae. And again, this is where I take on each piece of the story. I am her. I am barren. I am famine, laughing, blessing. I am promise, and I am him leaving, and tent flap flapping. I am dividing pigeon from dove. I am having heifer and ram. I am calling and I am constellating the heavens. I am each letter of the alphabet, and I am what's missing. Wandering, I am the voice commanding. I am all and nothing. I can't be pleased, and I am acting as if I think I am a nation ready to be born. I am cells dividing, can't be stopped. And I am breaking open. I am taking, I am mountain, saddle, ass. And I wish I were altar and not trapped in tangle. I am not so much angel as martyr, and I am all 3 days. I am not dead, and I am death by heartbreak. If true, I am heaven. If true, I am heaven is a reach, but speaking to you, I am. So that's a little journey into the dream of Sarah. And in that poem, I mention, and I want to highlight this for you as Jungians and dreamers, the stanza, I am dividing pigeon from dove, I am having heifer and ram, comes from a part of the story where Abraham has this midnight vision, nightmare, really, where he sees the future of their offspring and all the darkness and danger that their people are going to face. And as part of that, there's some strange ritual that takes place where Abraham is cutting in half these doves and animals and birds, and sort of this trail of blood opens up that he and God walk through, which would have been an image in those times of making a promise, a contract with each other, God and Abraham. But it comes in the form of a dream or a nighttime. It's described as a nighttime vision. I interpret it as a dream. So I want to go backwards a little bit to the title of my project, that all this is tied together with this project called The Life of H, Sarah Reimagined. And that's this project in which I am writing the poetry, creating the translations, and I share what I do as I go on a Substack blog. The link is in the chat, or at least how to find it. And the link is also on my website. But the title, The Life of H, Sarah Reimagined, points to the significance of words and letters in the story, and particularly the letter H, which is Hey in Hebrew. And the letter H in Hebrew plays a substantial role in Sarah's story. H was added to Abram and Sarah's names when they received their spiritual calling from God. So they went from Sarai and Abram to Sarah, as somebody pointed out in the chat. She went from an individual princess to a chieftain to a matriarch. And Abraham went from Abram, which is a name that means father, to Abraham, which is a name that means father of multitudes. And I think of Sarah, Abraham, and Hagar as an atriarchy, matriarchs and patriarchies that are joined by this letter H. The H in Sarah and Abraham's name that gets added to elevate them to their spiritual calling. And Hagar, who already has an H in her name. She starts out as Hagar. Her name is fascinating. The Hebrew root of her name means stranger. It means one who's cast away. It has so much story just in that name. But Hagar, the third parent in this triad, who is Sarah's maidservant, Abraham's second wife, is a matriarch in her own right. And she has a divine destiny of her own. And I hope to restore dignity and empowerment to her through my writing as well. So this letter H is one of 20, or Hey is one of 22 in the Hebrew alphabet. And in mystical Judaism, each letter is considered a building block of creation. Each letter is said to have a body and a soul. Each letter has a connection to an elemental aspect of earth. These letters, the text, are a poet's primum materia prima, right? Primary material, primordial material even. So as I've worked on this project, I've chosen poetic forms that keep me close to the letters, to their mystical and practical roots. And my intent as I've translated, and we'll get into some translations in a couple of minutes, have been to stay as accurate as I can. But unlike the Midrash, the imaginative exploration of these stories by adding something between the lines, writing into the white spaces, through the study of the letters and the root words, which in Hebrew are clusters of 3 letters that create word families as the vowels change and the verb tenses change, or these 3-letter roots, and we'll see some examples of this soon, are constellated with different vowels and take on new meanings, but they're related. The root words are related to one another in a linguistic and an etymological family. And this is just treasure to a poet. This is a treasure trove to have these deep meanings in words and letters. So I've chosen poetic forms that help me stay really close to the text. I don't want to just write into the white spaces. I want to write into the very words. I want to open them up, as I mentioned earlier, like those rooms in a dream that you didn't know were there. So I've chosen forms to write in, like the cento, which takes lines from different parts of different poems, or in this case, different texts of the Bible, and reweaves them, patchworks them into something new. And that's in prayer books. There are examples of centos in Hebrew prayer books, abecedarians and acrostics, which are poems that spell something vertically down the left margin, or in Hebrew it would be the right, but for us English speakers, the left margin of the poem. So it might go, each line might start sequentially with an A, a B, a C, if it was an abecedarian, or it might spell a word or a phrase. There's a famous abecedarian in the Bible that spells the author, Ibn Ezra's name, down the left-hand margin. Other forms like the villanelle, where lines repeat, or the erasure poem, and I'll show you an example of those. And the golden shovel, which reuses a text and creates something new from it. Those are the kinds of poetic forms I'm using in my exploration, so as to keep the text first and foremost in everything that I'm doing. Because my work is both an argument with the text, but it's also in deep reverence and respect for the texts. So I want to show you a couple of examples of how I've used form. So these are some of the forms that I talked about. And here you see a form. It's actually, coincidentally, I didn't do this on purpose in terms of when this is taking place, but in the cycle of Bible Torah readings this week, this text is being written. And this, when you look at it, if you want to put in the chat what it looks like to you, it's called Shirat Hayam. I'll give you a hint, Song of the Sea, Shirat Hayam. So what do you think that the way this is written on the page, this is the Torah, this is the way the text appears traditionally. What is, or you can unmute, what does that look like to you, knowing that it's called Song of the Sea? You could call this a concrete poem, a poem that looks like what it is. I don't see anything in the text. If anybody wants to unmute and make an answer up with something in the text. Yes, 10 points to Alina. So this is like a concrete poem in the Torah. There's so many poetic forms represented. So this poem that I'm going to show you now is an erasure poem. And we've talked about the significance of names for Sarah and Abraham, names in this story. This is a poem that wonders what's erased by a new name. Getting a new name, there's something beautiful. It can be an initiation. It can be claiming a new part of our personality. in this case, compulsory names for Jews, compulsory first names for Jews. This is an erasure poem where I took a text, not a biblical text in this case. This is a law from Nazi Germany. On the right, you can see the law just as I found it in a document. I found this document online. So that on the right is the original text. In an erasure poem, you block out parts of the original text to find a new poem. So I won't read this to you, but I just wanted you to see the visual of what an erasure poem is. And in this case, it's a very ugly renaming where in Nazi Germany, Jews were forced, if they had a name that wasn't obviously Jewish, they were forced to take the name Sarah for women and Abraham for men. So really sort of sick and twisted renaming so that Jews couldn't hide their identities as Jews. So this is an example, and a fairly disturbing one, of the negative polarity of name changes when it's imposed from without by an evil regime, as opposed to how I find the name changes in the text of Sarah and Abraham as beautiful moments when an initiation and a spiritual calling is happening. Then I want to show you another poem. This poem, Barren, I started to explore this idea of whether or not Sarah actually was barren. And there's a lot of evidence to support, as I've said before, that she would have been a high priestess, perhaps tending the temple of the moon. That's my theory. But in any case, a high priestess in that time and place would have taken a vow, not of celibacy. She was allowed to enjoy sexual pleasure, but a vow to not produce, to not reproduce, a vow to keep her womb empty. And actually medicine and so on was quite advanced in that time and place, in Ur in particular, in what's now southern Iraq. They really probably could have, probably knew a lot about how to stay barren, how to keep a womb empty. But again, women were allowed pleasure, high priestesses were allowed pleasure, but they took a vow not to have children unless they were spiritually called for some spiritual purpose to do so, which fits Sarah's story perfectly. So I investigated this word barren, both in English and Hebrew. And again, I'm not going to read you this poem, but I'll try to show it if it pulls up easily. But I'll tell you that what I did in this poem was just treat the dictionary as the poetic form itself. And I basically took phrases from the dictionary, I'll read some of it to you at least, to sort of uphold this idea that barrenness, there was more going on than meets the eye. So barren, this is from the dictionary, both Hebrew and English, refers to plants failing to fruit, barren apple trees, means not reproducing offspring, means producing inferior, means unproductive, barren of excitement, a barren routine, a barren mind, as in land that bears no crop. And it goes on to dig down into the meaning, into the Hebrew root letters that bring in different meanings, including to be extirpated, to be pulled out, to be plucked. And then this stanza here, barren women, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, the mothers of the Hebrew people. So I just want you to stay with that stanza for a moment, that the three of the matriarchs of the Hebrew people were quote unquote barren women. So you really have to think about that. Were they really barren, or were they priestesses who kept their wombs empty or came from a tradition of women who might have done that? But in any case, it's quite a puzzle that these matriarchs, these mothers of tribes of people, were considered barren. Sarah, her name means princess, is also an honorific for a priestess whose purpose was not reproducing. So that's from the Akkadian. So I wanted to share that poem to just show you how a word can open up parts of the story and spark the imagination to keep going. Not surprisingly, Sarah's very name, I'm going to see if I can get us back there with relative ease. Sarah's very name, the roots of her name, expose a lot too. So in Hebrew, her name is part of an enormous cluster of words. This shin resh he, the sounds SRH in English. And so in red, I've highlighted some of the words that are associated with that root. So that root, with just slight variations, has associations and meanings such as storage of wealth, rigidity, absorption and retention of liquid, as in turgor in plants, centralization of power, firmness, stubbornness, persistence, the attributes of a royal office, and the ability to fill and release. And my favorite, Sarah's name is very similar to the Akkadian for queen. And again, Akkadian is a language in ancient Mesopotamia where she was from. So that her name is almost identical with the word for queen, and in particular, queen of the reed hut. So more evidence from exploring the root of her name that she was a woman of nobility and of great spiritual power. So I did write what's called a golden shovel poem based on that knowledge. And in that case, what you do is you take usually a line from a poem. I took a verse from Genesis. Sarai was the name of Abraham's wife. Sarai was barren. She had no child. And I wrote a poem placing those words from this verse down the right-hand column of the page. And from that, created this poem that incorporates some of those words that you saw when we explored the roots of her name. Her name means rigid, firm. Again, parts of words from the root, shin resh he. Her name means rigid, Sarai, firm as a grape's thick skin. Her name means princess, was answer to Abram's exhalation, whose answering breath translated wife into the sickled moon's dark belly. Sarai, like cactus, desert camel, knew what you call barren, retains, releases, seeds. You see, she had a name before, had a laugh, had known breath inside of stone. She had a name before, child. So I just wanted to point out how those root words became part of the poem that started to tell a new story about who Sarah might have been, somebody who knew how to hold back, how to not reproduce, right, until it was time. Somebody who had a history and a purpose before she became a mother. I want to dive now into the actual translations because I think that's going to pull a lot of this together. So again, I embarked on my study of biblical Hebrew very late in life. I'm now 3/4 of the way through a 1-year certification program in biblical Hebrew with the Jewish Theological Seminary, which I find kind of humorous as a 6th grade Hebrew school dropout, now studying with rabbis in training and Jewish educators in training. And it has been fascinating. So a lot of what I've been learning, I've shared with you so far in some of these poems. But what I really want to focus on now is the story of Sarah and Hagar, because I believe that this is a project of restoration, of restoration, and restoring this myth so that we can find something better. I started out by saying we're dreamers, we're storytellers. We need to tell the better story. So in my translation, I strive to be accurate. I don't add any words. You'll see how my translations are longer than the traditional ones. They have more words in them, and I'm going to show you one in just a moment, because the biblical Hebrew language that these stories are written in have such a small vocabulary. So so just to give you a sense, and don't hold me to the math because numbers aren't my specialty, I'm a poet, but there is something like 300 and something thousand words in the Hebrew Bible, in the Torah. But all those stories, those 300,000 words worth of stories are composed from about 8,000 words. That's not a lot. So each word, since there are so few of them, have multiple possible meanings. The Torah itself, and I'll show you an image of this, the layering on of these words. In the Torah itself, the actual scrolls, the words don't have vowels. So that leaves it open to even more interpretation, because I've shown you several examples of how these 3-letter roots work together to open up into entire families of words. So when you add vowels, this can transform a word's meaning. It can flip it around, turn it on its head. So it's quite fascinating. And then on top of that, you have cantillation marks. So I'll show you a little bit of that just so you see what I'm dealing with. That's not where we're supposed to be. Just to show you what I'm dealing with as I translate. And then we're going to look at the translation of just one verse. In this story. So this is just an example. The black are the letters.
I'm sorry, Tzivia, we're not seeing your screen.
Oh, okay. I wonder why that is. Let me try it one more time. Thank you for letting me know, though. Okay, let's try once more. Is that better? Can you see it now?
Yes, all good.
Great. So the black here are the letters, the red are the vowels. So the black are mostly consonants, the red dots are the vowels, and the blue marks are the cantillation, telling how it's to be chanted. So this is the material that I'm working with, that anybody's working with. And when you look at the Torah, all you're seeing, you're not seeing any of the red. You're not seeing any of those vowels. So I took the part, I've been translating various chapters of Sarah's story, and I'm going to just share a very brief part of Sarah and Hagar's story. So sort of the ugliest moment in Sarah's story is when, after asking Hagar, calling upon Hagar, her maidservant, to carry a child for her because she cannot. So basically she asked Hagar, she is in a position of power, so she's commanding Hagar to be her surrogate mother. Sarah then becomes pregnant years later and has a son. And so now she can't tolerate, so it seems, Hagar and her son Ishmael living with them anymore. And she sends Hagar and her son into the desert. She exiles them. And just imagine, in this desert culture, if you're not part of a household, a family, a village, you're most probably going to die in the desert alone. And yet Sarah commands Abraham to do this. Abraham is distressed. He loves his son Ishmael. He loves his second wife Hagar. And he knows the risks of sending them out into the desert, and he's distressed. And God says to him, listen to Sarah's voice. Do as she says. And so Abraham does do this. He casts them out. He sends them with water and bread into the desert. Hagar is, of course, heartbroken, and she and her son run out of water, and she is sure that her son is going to die. At the last minute, God intervenes. He opens Hagar's eyes. She sees a well of water. She and her son are saved. In the same story, Hagar ends up giving God a name in the scene in the desert. She's so grateful. She says, you are the one who sees me, and she gives him that name. Hagar is the only person in the Bible to name God. As we've talked about names, God names others, Hagar names God. So this is the verse in Genesis 21:9 that I am going to focus on right now. And in English, this is a common translation. Sarah saw the son whom Hagar the Egyptian had borne to Abraham playing. Very simple. I translated it like this. Soon after, Sarah eyed the son of Hagar, Hagar the Egyptian. So we're going to talk about why I changed the word from saw to eyed. So in the chat, I would love to hear from you what changes when this word changes from saw to eyed. Instead of using the verb to see, to use the verb she eyed the son. What changes for you in tone or meaning? And then I'll tell you a little bit about how I made that choice and what it opens up about this story. And you can also unmute yourself if you prefer. But what's different about somebody seeing, passively observing someone and eyeing them? So we've got a couple of responses coming in. Saw is more passive. Yes. So that would make it seem this is a scene where Sarah, the next thing that's going to happen is she's going to cast them out. So it would seem very impulsive and cruel. She just saw Ishmael and Isaac playing and then said, send them out of here. Like she's having a tantrum or something, right? So passive, yes. Eye is like a spyglass. Yeah, something much more active and focused. So I'm going to offer yet another reason why I chose eyed. So yes, absolutely, for the reasons that are in the chat. Seeing is passive. It's non-specific. She was eyeing this scene of these two boys playing. She was assessing the situation. It was very active. It was more focused, like a spyglass. She was looking, she was thinking. This is a problem, what's happening right now. Now that she has a child of her own, from her own body, according to the laws at that time of mistresses and their surrogates, the surrogate mom, the second wife, Sarah could have just made Isaac the one who was going to inherit. That's what should have happened legally, and that is what Sarah made happen. But in that case, Hagar and Ishmael would have had no more status. All the status that Ishmael had temporarily as the heir would have been gone. Hagar would have been perpetually only a second wife. But Sarah saw. She was a prophetess. She could see things. And what she saw was that Hagar and Ishmael had their own destiny. And it turned out to be true. And God affirmed it by saying, listen to her voice, do what Sarah says. God would not have wanted Hagar and Ishmael to suffer. But the truth of the matter was that the covenant with Abraham was about Sarah's son, not his son. And Isaac was Sarah's son. We talked earlier about the importance of the womb connection, as opposed to the connection of the father. And this would have been something that came from ancient Mesopotamia. So I changed the translation from Sarah saw the son. So this is the word here, vatera, she saw, to she eyed the son of Hagar. And there's another reason too. The eye in Egyptian culture, I'm sure many of you know this, the eye is a sign of protection, a symbol of protection. And this comes from the story, the myth of Horus, who loses an eye and then magically has his eye restored to him. He loses his precious eye and it's magically restored. And I use the word eye to allude to Horus's eye and to show that what was precious to each woman got restored to her. Because if Hagar had raised Ishmael with Sarah and Abraham in their household, she couldn't have passed along her Egyptian ways to him. She would have had to impose the ways of the Canaanites and of Sarah and Abraham on her son, and she would have had no autonomy. Once she was in the desert, in exile, she receives God's covenant too, that she's going to be a matriarch, that her son is going to give birth to nations of his own. So Ishmael becomes the father of the Muslim people, of Islam, ultimately. So each woman gets something restored. Sarah gets to pass her spiritual heritage onto her son and fulfill the promise that God has made to her. And Hagar gets her son restored. Despite this horrible trial, there's nothing to sugarcoat that. Hagar went through a horrible trial, but Sarah saw something. She saw a way out for everybody. And as cruel as it might look on the surface, it was the best of the possibilities given the time and place that they lived and the power dynamics inherent. So I'm going to pause there. Before I pause, let me just explain the rest. So soon after Sarah eyed the son of Hagar, Hagar the Egyptian, who was once dragged out of Egypt and who bore a son for Abraham too. Sarah saw him laughing, playing with Yitzhak, her son. This last word here, mitzchek, that's the root of Isaac's name. And so this word that's been puzzled over by rabbis and scholars and lay people for centuries, what was meant by the two were playing. This word also means laughing, it means mocking. But I and other translators see Yitzhak's name in there, and I and other translators restore that to this too. So if we can see the story of Sarah and Hagar in a different light, I feel that we can see the story of these peoples, the Jewish people, the Muslim people, the people of Islam, the land. We can see that this truly is the story of the land of cousins, the land of brothers and sisters and mothers. And I hope that restoring this story one verse at a time, putting back some of Hagar's history into the verse, Hagar, the Egyptian who was once dragged out of Egypt, giving her life, restoring her life and her dignity to the story, we can find a new way forward by looking back. So I'm going to pause it there for questions that you might have, and also just what's come up for you, what new thoughts, what new associations come to you from opening up the story and the words in these ways. So Elric, I'm so sorry. Elric, yes.
Oh, that's okay. Just thank you. Wonderful. I'm going in a million different directions. I'm thinking a lot about how there are echoes and resonances with the story of Rachel and Jacob as well. But I wanted to ask you specifically, you mentioned priestess of the sacred marriage, and that was unfamiliar to me, so I wanted to ask you about that.
I'm glad that you did. Thank you. The sacred marriage was an ancient ritual that was performed in Mesopotamia and other places in the ancient Near East, where a high priestess and a king, for example, would either play act, we're not entirely sure whether they just play act or they actually had coitus, but they would reenact the joining of the gods and goddesses, usually to restore fertility to the land. So at a time of famine, such a high priestess might join with a king. She might be called on by a king, for example, in this case, Abimelech or the Pharaoh, to enact this ritual with the king. So it wouldn't have been that Abraham in this case, was just like foisting her off or just trying to save his own skin. That would have been a story that was written over the sacred marriage ritual, because the Deuteronomists, the later editors and redactors of these stories, that didn't go with the story of monotheism they were trying to tell. So they put this other story over it about Abraham passing her off and saving his own skin by giving her to the king, where in fact she would have been an empowered priestess doing her job. And trying to bring through this ritual fertility back to the land and being paid in silver and livestock for her services.
I'm remembering now a book that I read many years ago that suggested the possibility that Mary, the mother of Jesus, was such a priestess, and that the tradition that she was a virgin came from that, because the priestesses of the goddess were considered virgins, and they would have these relations, and sometimes there would be a child would be born, and that child would be considered a child of the god and the goddess, because when they consummated that, they were taking on metaphorically the role of the god and the goddess.
Exactly.
And so their offspring would have been divine. So I forget the name of the book, but that was an interesting book that I read many years ago. You might be familiar with it. I can't remember what the name of it was.
I don't know the title of the specific book, but there are a lot of parallels between Sarah and Mary.
Very interesting. Thank you.
Any
Go
other
ahead,
questions? Yeah, Victoria. Oh,
Victoria.
sorry.
So I realized when you're telling it that both Hagar and Sarah had awful trials, because I never thought of it the parallel that good old God really likes to test people, and so he tested both of them. So that just comes to mind after your talk.
Yeah, absolutely, Victoria. And I'm glad you brought that up. There are so many parallels between what happened to Ishmael, what happened to Isaac, Sarah and Hagar. That's to bring it back to the very beginning when I was talking about how it helped me heal. Over the years, I've identified differently with Abraham at times as somebody who had to give his child over to God and surrender fully, as I had to do when I lost custody of my child. Sarah, who was a woman who had so much promise to her, but the promise wasn't delivered, and who became a mother in a very unusual way, which I did as well. And also with Hagar, the other mother, the mother who was cast off. So there are all these archetypes and paradigms for motherhood and loss and testing that in a way we actually all go through in life, whether it's because of God or because this is just how life is, that we get tested and we can make spiritual meaning from these tests and trials, although it seems quite cruel. I always say, just give me the book. Don't put me through this visceral test.
And I just add to the cruelty part is that well, you know, I'm not fond of this story. And I feel that God set us up for what's going on today. He set us up to have these two tribes that hate each other. And yet we're all Semites.
Yeah.
We're all, you know, connected.
I would say, I would say that the redactors, that the editors, and the interpreters, I think in the Jewish religion, one thing I love about the Jewish tradition, the Jewish wisdom tradition, is that we're all asked to interpret, all of us, not just rabbis. Each individual is asked to interpret the story anew for themselves. And they left it vague on purpose. They didn't put the vowels in on purpose, some say, so that we could have multiple interpretations. And I think that's our job, is to find the better story, to interpret it accurately, but also with great imagination, so that we can find the better story to lead us out of this mess. I don't know that God's the one who put us into the mess, or the people who've wanted power by interpreting the story in different ways put us into this mess. Yeah, Christine.
Yeah, just listening to what you were just saying, I've been learning a lot more about our constitutional democracy lately. And it seems to me that that truly that it's really our job as citizens to continually engage, you might say interpret, but to continually engage with what does our Constitution mean?
Yeah.
And what is the power, you know, given in its structure, and so on and so on. So I'm just hearing a parallel in that way.
Yeah, I see a lot of parallels there too. And I've thought of that often. Also in that, you know, our Constitution holds such promise. It's an ideal that we've never quite achieved. And I feel like, you know, our wisdom traditions are the same. They give us an ideal. I think monotheism is a beautiful ideal. I don't feel that humans have found our way to it. And this is the story of the discovery of monotheism, which got interpreted as a hierarchical system. I believe that Sarah was trying to put it forth as an all-in-one system instead of either a masculine or a feminine deity. I think she was trying to preserve the ancient ways, the feminine ways, the earth-based ways, as an all-in-one kind of oneness, a oneness that contained all of that. But again, I think the way it got interpreted and codified has been pretty toxic.
One other little question. You said, and did I miss this? You said Hagar named God. What did she name God?
Thank you for asking, because that's part of the eye, the seeing. She named God the one who sees me. The God who sees me.
Wow.
And I don't see another hand, so I'll go ahead and add, in terms of names of God and the way I wanted to end today. There's a name of God in this story that I didn't know until I started reading the Hebrew for myself and studying. One of the names of God here is El Shaddai. Has anybody else heard that name for God? El Shaddai, it's in the Bible. Yay. I didn't know it. El Shaddai means the God of high places, the God or the goddess of high places. It also means the many-breasted one, and the God or the deity who provides. So it's a very feminine image, the many-breasted one. El Shaddai is usually worshipped on mountaintops, mountains, breast-shaped. And El Shaddai is the name of God that's used when Abraham's receiving the covenant of fertility from God, the covenant of land and fertility. So I want to share with you, to close up our time together, a blessing that Jacob, who's Sarah's grandson, gives to his sons when Jacob's about to die. Jacob, the great dreamer of the Hebrew Bible. So let me see if I can get us there. So I love this, that this blessing is right there in the, I'm just I wanted to remind myself to tell you that if you're curious about this, you can find more at tziviagover.substack.com. That's where I share my translations as I go. I call it my high wire act because I share them in public as I go along. Some selected resources if you're curious. Savina Toibel's books are really fascinating, and Miki Raver's book, Listen to Her Voice, to get new perspectives on Sarah. And of course, a plug for my own book, Dreaming on the Page, about dream writing. But this is the blessing that Jacob gives to his sons. Jacob, Sarah's grandson, gives to his son. And in English, the God of your father's house who helps you, and Shaddai, who blesses you with blessings of heaven above, blessings of the deep that couches below, very feminine image, blessings of the deep that couches below, blessings of the breast and the womb. So that's right there in Genesis 49:25. There are a lot of images of God as maternal, but this is one quite beautiful blessing that features Shaddai, who was very much part of Abraham and Sarah's story. And I thought a beautiful way for us to end would be to end on a blessing. And to give you a moment to translate, we really just have a couple of moments, but just by transforming this blessing into your own word with the imageries and associations that are meaningful to you, perhaps create one line of blessing to put in the chat. May you be blessed with. May you be blessed with the blessings of heaven, the blessings of love, the blessings of reconciliation. Maybe put one line in the chat of blessing to all the people who are here and to yourself. Or if you'd like to unmute and say a line of blessing out loud, or just to think it in your heart, it would be fun. May you be blessed with wonder. That's beautiful. May you be blessed with the blessings of wonder. May you be blessed with seeing. I love that. May you be blessed with abundance. Beautiful embodied soul. That's a beautiful blessing. May you be blessed in the sacred grove. Gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous. Okay, my friends. Oh, the blessings are keeping on coming in. May you be blessed with fertility of spiritual fullness, of peace and understanding. May you be blessed with the love, healing, and spirit. And somebody wants to see the references again. Absolutely. And if anybody wants a copy of the slides, may you be blessed with the blessings of air, fire, water, earth, and spirit. May you be blessed with rainbows and hearts. Oh, I'm trying to go back, Erica. I don't know why. It's not letting me, but I'll be happy to send you that. Okay. Well, I want to offer you all blessings. Oh, looks like we have another one coming in. Oh, yay. Thank you, Andrew. I don't know how you did that, but I'm very impressed. May you all be blessed with sweet and beautiful dreams and with new stories that restore and nourish you. Thank you all so very much for your attention and your curiosity in bringing your beautiful spirits here under this tent of Sarah's wisdom.
On behalf of the board and everyone here tonight, I want to thank you, Tzivia. And I can close with a Hine matov u'monaim shevet achim gam yachad. Hine matov u'monaim shevet achim gam yachad. Hine matov shevet achim gam yachad. Hine matov shevet achim gam yachad.
Yay, and that means how pleasant and beautiful it is for us all to be gathered here together. Thank you, Christina. That was gorgeous.